Welcome to the second part of my two-part video series on designing a pair of LED dice using an Arduino. In part 1, I showed you how I used display multiplexing to control 14 LEDs with only 9 Arduino pins. In this video, I'll be stepping through the Arduino sketch, explaining in detail how the Arduino is programmed. If you missed the first video, a link to part 1 is provided below. Now let's get started. Okay, let's take a look at the LED dice roll Arduino sketch. First of all, we need to set up all of our variables. I've got a variable to store the random numbers for die 1 and die 2, and a third variable to store a random number called die rand, which I'll explain later, and a variable called display. This is going to keep track of which die I want to display and when. And then I have 2 select lines assigned to pins 2 and 3 on the Arduino, and I'm just calling them select 1 and 2. Those will be used to control the transistors, the NFETs, that will select either die 1 or die 2, and I've got additional information up above explaining which transistor I'm using as well as other information. Next, we've got the LED port pins on the Arduino, each one controlling a single LED, and I just kept the pin numbers the same as the variable numbers just to help keep track of what's going on. And finally, a button variable. This is the port pin, Arduino pin 12, used for the push button. Now we set up all our pins on the Arduino, the button as an input, and our select lines for the transistors and all of the LEDs as outputs. Next, we want to initiate the pseudorandom number generator. We have to use this random seed analog read 0. And what this is going to do is this is going to read the A to D pin 0. It's important that nothing be connected to that pin because that's where the random number is being generated, the random noise on pin 0. Next, we want to set the select lines low for die 1 and die 2 just to make sure they're both off. And we're going to set the initial value of display equal to 1. And I'll explain display 1 further down in the sketch. So next we get into our loop, and we are in a series of if statements. So if the button press is high, if you've pressed the button and it's read as a high, then die 1, we're going to generate a random number between 1 and 6. That's what this does, and we're going to store that in die 1, and then we're going to do that again, pick another random number between 1 and 6, store that in die 2. Then we get to the next if statement for die 1. If display equals 1, which up above I set it to 1, so it does, then we're going to take the random number that was stored in die 1 up here and place it in die rand. And then we're going to we're going to select die 1 by turning on that first transistor on select line 1, set that high, and turn off the second FET, the second transistor, setting that select line low. After we've selected which die we want to turn on and which one off, in this case we're going to turn on die 1 and turn off die 2, we're going to call the function display die. That's further down. I'll explain how that works further down in the sketch. That is going to select which LEDs within the die pattern should be turned on based on the random number that's stored in die rand. And we're going to delay for 5 milliseconds after we turn those LEDs on. 5 milliseconds seems to work well, multiplexing between the two displays. You can experiment with that value if you'd like, but that's a value that I found works very well. After that 5 millisecond delay, we call another function called all off. This is just going to turn all the LEDs off before we go to display die number 2. And finally, we set the value of display equal to 2. And then we move on to the next if statement for die number 2. If display equals 2, which it does, now we're going to store the value, the random number that was stored earlier in die 2, and place that in the die rand variable, identical to what we did for die 1. This if statement is essentially a duplicate of this if statement here. Only the difference now is that we're going to turn off die 1 and turn on die 2 with the select lines. Then, once again, we're going to call the display die function to display the appropriate LEDs. And like last time, we're going to delay for 5 milliseconds to allow some time to display those LEDs. After that period of time, we call the function all off to turn all the LEDs back off. And finally, we're going to set that display value back to 1. So essentially, the program is just going to keep looping back and forth, setting back to display 1, meeting this condition, displaying die 1, setting display equal to 2, meeting this condition, looping through, setting display equal to 1 again, looping through, on and on and on, to continue that persistence of vision and that illusion that all LEDs are on at the same time. Next, we have all the functions. So here I just listed a description of die 1 and die 2, how they're physically located on the breadboard, and then each associated function. So the display die function is a series of if statements, depending on what the value of die rand is. If it's a 1, display only one LED, which is LED 7. If it's a 2, display 2 die. If it's a 3, display 1, 2, 3 die, and so on, all the way up to displaying 6 LEDs. And last, the all off function, which basically just sets all the port pins low to turn off all the LEDs. And that's essentially it. And that concludes this 2-part video series on the Arduino Dice Roll project. If you missed the first video, click on the link provided to view part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.